Emma Delaney was the kind of girl who followed every rule, while Officer Travis Holcomb was the kind of man trusted to enforce them. But when she vanished without a trace and he became the last known person to see her, the car wasn't crashed, nor were the doors forced open. There were no immediate red flags and no blood, but with no tracks and no sign of Emma, their search wrapped up by the evening. But what they didn't know was that the truth wasn't hiding in some far-off city or down a busy highway. The posters on telephone poles began to peel in the summer heat, and the local news cycle had already moved on. Then, without warning, a fire broke out at the Delaney home just after midnight. A neighbor saw smoke rising from the basement window and called emergency services. They questioned Emma's mother, who was visibly distraught and confused. There was no sign of forced entry into the house. It had been calculated, prepared, and executed over time, possibly even while others were living just a floor above. No evidence that someone had broken in or tampered with the property. Investigators began retracing every step taken during the initial days of her disappearance. They started with her digital footprint, digging into her phone and online activity to search for anything unusual. Most of it was normal: school emails, texts with classmates, a couple of group chats about upcoming exams. But buried deep within her photo storage was a single image that hadn't been posted publicly, nor shared with anyone. Everything pointed to the idea that whoever had hidden Emma had intimate knowledge of the home's layout. The containers weren't randomly placed. They were hidden with intent and planning. She told them that part of the basement had been blocked off for years, and that she'd assumed the locked panel near the back wall led to old storage or possibly even a sealed coal chute from decades ago. She'd never had a reason to investigate. Taken at night, it showed her hallway dimly lit by what looked like the glow of a nightlight. In the center of the frame stood a figure, blurred and half in shadow. The outline of the person was faint, but there were certain unmistakable details: a utility belt, a walkie-talkie, and a pale blue shirt with a dark patch on the shoulder. It resembled a police uniform. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days before Emma disappeared, at 3:07 a.m. Firefighters arrived quickly and managed to contain the blaze before it spread, but the damage was extensive. Most of the basement had been scorched beyond recognition. It was buried much closer, quiet, patient, and waiting for someone to look just a little deeper. A missing persons report was filed, and a single patrol car was assigned to monitor any updates. No statewide alert was issued. Tucked behind a stack of scorched boxes and partially melted plastic bins were several large containers buried beneath debris. They had been overlooked during the firefight. Suddenly, what had been written off as a teenage runaway case transformed into something far more sinister. But there were deeper questions that no one could answer. Why would Emma's remains be in her own basement? Why would someone go to such great lengths to conceal her presence right under the roof where her mother lived? When one of the investigators pried one open, he recoiled. Inside was a mix of lye, dirt, and long strands of reddish-brown hair. More containers were discovered, all with the same grim contents. After all, Emma was nearly an adult, and adults had the legal right to leave if they wanted. So the working theory was that Emma had run away, maybe overwhelmed by school or some hidden teenage stress. Her mother protested this idea, insisting that Emma had never even expressed frustration, let alone shown signs of planning to disappear. Still, without direct evidence of foul play or a witness, the case remained classified as a voluntary disappearance. The driver's side window was rolled up, and inside sat her purse, school books, and phone, all untouched. The driver's seat was slightly wet, suggesting the door had been opened briefly in the early morning rain. Strangely, there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints in the mud, and nothing stolen. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the car and vanished. The town of Willow Creek realized too late that the danger had been wearing a badge all along. In the quiet, unassuming town of Willow Creek, where neighbors knew each other by name and crime was mostly limited to speeding tickets, the disappearance of 17-year-old Emma Delaney stirred only mild curiosity. Emma wasn't the kind of teenager who drew much attention. She kept to herself, excelled in school, and rarely went out except for class or helping her mother at the local library. So when she failed to show up for her morning shift at the front desk, her mother assumed it was a simple miscommunication or maybe even a case of oversleeping. But when the hours dragged on with no response to calls or texts, worry turned into panic. By noon, Emma's car was found abandoned on the side of an old service road just outside town. When officers arrived, they assessed the scene without urgency. A few officers canvassed the nearby woods. The townspeople whispered, speculated, and slowly returned to their routines. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Emma, and the town's brief surge of concern faded into routine. While the fire was ruled accidental, likely caused by old wiring, a routine inspection of the basement uncovered something strange. The hair was sent for analysis, and within days, DNA confirmed it belonged to Emma. The news rocked the community. Detectives swarmed the Delaney residence. The officers were baffled. And as more pieces surfaced from beneath the ashes, it became clear that this wasn't a crime of impulse. With the discovery of Emma's hair and the realization that she had likely been hidden or worse, imprisoned inside her own home, the photo was dark and grainy. Taken at night, it showed her hallway dimly lit by what looked like the glow of a nightlight. In the center of the frame stood a figure, blurred and half in shadow. The outline of the person was faint, but there were certain unmistakable details: a utility belt, a walkie-talkie, and a pale blue shirt with a dark patch on the shoulder. It resembled a police uniform. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days before Emma disappeared, at 3:07 a.m. The image alarmed investigators. They began to cross-reference local law enforcement logs to see who had been at the Delaney home in that time frame. That's when they found something odd. Officer Travis Holcomb had noted a visit to the Delaney residence the same night, reporting that he had responded to a noise complaint. However, no such complaint had been called in through dispatch. It wasn't in any records. There was no audio, no written log, just his note, and his body camera had not been activated. When questioned, Holcomb maintained that Emma herself had called him directly. Investigators revisited the damaged basement and the partially burned walls. When they knocked on one specific wall panel, it sounded hollow. It was nearly invisible beneath a layer of scorched floorboards. It took hours to open, and when they did, they found a narrow staircase leading to a sub-basement, one not shown on any official blueprint or renovation record. It was no bigger than a walk-in closet, with cement walls, a thin mattress, and a metal chair anchored to the floor. It wasn't on any recent maps, and he assumed it had been part of a long-forgotten storage unit. But inside, the air was thick with decay. Something about her calmness, her quiet nature, had drawn him in. He began following her, at first by patrol route, later off-duty. Over the months, he scoped out her house, planned entries, and eventually constructed the basement prison using old schematics and equipment purchased under a false name. He claimed Emma was safe, that he fed her, that he looked after her better than the world ever could. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings about Emma Delaney's case, some pinned with thumbtacks, others taped over hand-scribbled notes. On the night of the house fire, Holcomb had been outside, monitoring from his car. He saw smoke too late. By the time he reached the trapdoor, Emma was gone. She had escaped. What officers didn't see until too late was that she had never left. She had always been waiting to be found. Injured, barefoot, and terrified, she had slipped away into the woods behind the property, using a cellar exit he never realized was accessible. A small cot, empty food wrappers, and a lantern suggested someone had been living there recently. Tucked inside a duffel bag was a weathered notebook filled with pages of tight handwriting. Hikers in a wooded area 20 miles from town discovered a shallow grave marked only with a pile of rocks. Inside were Emma's remains, her body curled in on itself, her hands still bound with frayed rope. The autopsy revealed she had died from exposure and untreated injuries, likely just days after she escaped. Chains, padded cuffs, and an empty plastic food container sat nearby. The room was cold and silent, but there was no body. Behind it, they uncovered thick insulation masking something more sinister, layers of soundproof padding and wiring rooted to a small hidden camera. Traces of her DNA, and faint fingerprints hers on the underside of the trapdoor. She had been alive down there. The wiring led to an unused circuit breaker, suggesting someone had set up surveillance inside the home without anyone knowing. Claiming she heard noises outside her window and felt unsafe. According to him, she greeted him at the door, spoke for a few minutes, and eventually said it was a false alarm. But Emma's call history showed no outgoing calls to Holcomb or any number linked to the police department. An internal review was opened quietly. While her mother lived above, Emma had been trapped below, hidden in a room no one knew existed. Holcomb had built himself a secret prison right beneath the floorboards. Holcomb, a veteran officer with no previous complaints, was put on administrative leave while his house and devices were examined. Law enforcement across state lines circulated his photo, flagged his name, and monitored known relatives. Tips came in sporadically, one from a gas station attendant who swore he saw him near the border, another from a motel clerk convinced Holcomb had stayed the night, but none of the leads led anywhere. He had vanished as completely as Emma once had, leaving behind only fear and confusion. What they found only deepened the mystery. Hidden in a locked drawer of his desk were printouts of Emma's school schedule, maps of her neighborhood, and surveillance-style photos of her walking home from school on different days. Holcomb had been watching her for months and no one had noticed. The suspension of Officer Travis Holcomb sent ripples through Willow Creek's police department. A man trusted for over a decade, now at the center of a possible abduction case, had vanished before he could be formally charged. They were all of Emma taken from a distance, sometimes through glass, often when she was alone. She was pictured walking to school, sitting at the library, even through the window of her bedroom. Each photo was marked with a date and time, suggesting Holcomb had been documenting her movements for over 6 months. The morning after his suspension, Holcomb's patrol car was found abandoned at a rest stop an hour outside town. The keys were still in the ignition, the driver's seat warm, and his badge left neatly on the dashboard. It was as if he had simply stepped away for a moment, but he never returned. Inside the glove compartment, investigators found something far more disturbing, a manila envelope packed with photos. Back in Willow Creek, the Delaney home became the center of a second, more invasive search. Then they discovered the trapdoor. Bolted shut with 4 heavy-duty locks, forensics teams found strands of Emma's hair. The horrifying truth began to take shape. 3 months passed without a single confirmed sighting of Travis Holcomb. Then, in late autumn, a farmer clearing brush on the outskirts of an abandoned property came across a rusted metal shed. It was a confession. Holcomb detailed how he had first seen Emma during a routine traffic patrol near her school, but the final entries told a different story. For weeks, Holcomb searched frantically, but he never found her. A week later, Emma had nearly made it out, but the help she needed didn't come in time. What officers didn't see until too late was that she had never left. She had always been waiting to be found.